Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Challenge Your Assumptions, leveraging real-world patient journeys at scale for clinical trial strategies. I'm Mike Holland, the editor for Pharmaceutical Executive, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Pharmaceutical Executive and sponsored by Komodo. I would like to share a statement from our sponsor. Komodo Health is a technology platform company creating the new standard for real-world data and analytics by pairing the industry's most complete view of patient encounters with enterprise software and machine learning that connects the dots between individual patient journeys and large-scale health outcomes. Across life sciences, payer, provider, and developers, we help our customers unearth patient-centric insights at scale, marrying clinical data with advanced algorithms and AI-powered software solutions to inform decision-making, close gaps in care, address disease burden, and help the enterprise create a more cost-effective, value-driven healthcare system. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of the video player. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small icon in the bottom right corner of the media player. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark help widget in the top right of your presentation window. I would now like to introduce today's speaker. We are pleased to be joined today by Kwame Marfo. Kwame is the Market Strategy and Innovation Lead for Clinical Development at Komodo Health. He has over 15 years of experience in the healthcare industry, working in strategy and operations leadership roles across manufacturing, technical operations, commercial, and R&D. Prior to Komodo, Kwame served as a Director of Insights and Analytics for Roche Genentech's Global Clinical Operations. Kwame graduated with a BS in Chemical Engineering from Stanford University and an MBA in Corporate Strategy and Market Analysis from the University of California in Berkeley. Thank you for joining us today. Please get us started.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and thank you all for spending the time to join us today for today's conversation. And again, we're really looking to talk about how we can challenge our assumptions, and these are the assumptions around the patient experience throughout the healthcare system, and how we can begin to leverage the real-world patient journeys at scale, again, at scale across the entire population to really begin to inform clinical trial strategies. So really looking forward to dumping into this with you all. Here's a quick rundown of the agenda. We'll go through the introductions. Again, thank you for the warm introduction. But then we'll also level set on what we mean by the patient journey. So understanding what it really takes to build a robust patient journey. And then getting a sense of all the required data inputs to allow for that, and to allow for that with robustness at scale. But then more importantly, how once that is done and completed, software solutions and technology could be deployed at scale to really bring analytics and insights directly to the fingertips of users to begin to inform how they are designing clinical trials, how they're thinking about selecting sites and investigators for those trials, and ultimately how they're looking to accelerate trial recruitment, and more importantly, continue to support patients even after the trial is completed. And at the end, we'll definitely have time for questions, but feel free to ask your questions through the Q&A box throughout the conversation. So again, thank you for the warm introduction. The one piece I definitely want to emphasize is that I have some lived experience here coming from the industry of really thinking through how, when we were thinking about clinical trial strategy and execution, we had a whole bunch of assumptions. And it wasn't until we began to really interrogate and challenge those assumptions with real world data and really understand what is actually happening in the world today for the patients of interest that we're looking after. We began to realize that in some instances we confirmed some of those assumptions, but in some instances we actually challenged them and we were wrong. But in both situations, we were ultimately better. We're ultimately better positioned to position our trials for success. And I'm really excited to talk through how you all can begin to do the same. So let's first align on what we mean by a patient journey. For us at Komodo, when we talk about a patient journey, we're really talking about the overview of all the encounters, interactions that a patient will have with the healthcare system at large. This could be from the first presentation of disease, onset of symptoms, through diagnosis of that disease, and then ultimately treatment of that disease, which also involves components of understanding the outcome of those treatments. And we've all experienced this. We've all probably been had symptoms of a particular disease, visited our primary care physician, explained what those symptoms were. They probably came with an initial diagnosis. Maybe in some instances we had to be referred to a specialist. We had some scripts that were filled. Maybe we had to come back for some lab results, and then ultimately receive some next second line or third line therapies depending on the disease and the diagnosis we received. And in my experience and your experience through this relative to the particular symptoms and diagnosis we have, it looks different. And the ability to be able to stitch this together in a longitudinal manner is what we're describing as this patient journey. And I'm sure you can see how having a sense of this, having a sense of how we all really interact with the healthcare system, can begin to lay the groundwork for the insights and analytics to really inform how we think about developing novel therapeutics within clinical development. Now, there's so many primary components about this patient level journey that you can think about, and the moment we're able to do this at scale across huge populations, you can see how over time we can get in-depth profiling of different patients and even the treatment patterns of providers, where we can begin to understand the demographic nature of demographic data of the patients, inclusive of their race and ethnicity, and see how that impacts their course of treatment and their journey through the healthcare system. We can also begin to see diagnosis patterns and treatment milestones, and I understand how there could be common comorbidities or treatment patterns that begin to emanate through the data relative to the patient journeys across multiple segments throughout the country. After we've done all of this, you can also think about indexing on the particular providers and the healthcare organizations where patients like you and I are actually receiving care, and understanding how there could be different referral patterns throughout that network, and how potentially seeing a particular provider or receiving care in a particular institution would impact the journey through the healthcare system. Then ultimately, again, thinking through the treatment progression, thinking through all the treatment options and therapies that we might receive as we're going through the healthcare system, and understanding how we progress from one treatment regimen to another over time. These are all the components that really feed into this patient journey. And we're all fortunate to live in a world today where we're able to begin to capture all of this at scale and capture it across the population to see aggregate trends, but then also to go very deep into individual trends as well. And as I'm sure you can all imagine, this is extremely critical to feed into how we think about designing clinical trials, how we think about executing these trials, and then ultimately how we also think about supporting patients after the trial is completed and hopefully the drug is approved. Now, it's sounds great. It's definitely feasible, but the challenge is that it's difficult, and it has been difficult because all of the pieces of data that characterize how patients are interacting with the healthcare system tend to be siloed. They tend not to be really connected together. And there's a huge opportunity across the entire healthcare ecosystem to really begin to leverage and use this healthcare data in a bit more strategic way, and especially within the clinical development space. Now, that being said, we still have to think about selecting different sources of data to really begin to characterize the patient journey. And when we think about that, there are a couple themes to consider. The first is like really getting a sense of the breadth of the data. How representative is the data? What's the size of that data relative to the population of interest? There's also a sense of getting a sense of how deep that data is. To what extent is it really characterizing the specificity of the interactions with the healthcare system, and is extremely rich with so many different encounters with the healthcare system? No data set is perfect. There's generally always missingness in the data, but how can you begin to characterize that and really get a sense that the data is complete and that the data is actually timely, refreshed, and accurate, and giving a true representation of what's currently happening within the healthcare system? There's also a huge sense of having a longitudinal nature of the data. It's definitely limited to get snapshots in time, and being able to really stitch together the long-term journeys of patients throughout the data is effectively the baseline that allows for us to really see patterns over time. We definitely can't compromise security, and really ensuring that we're maintaining patient privacy throughout the leveraging the data for insights as well. So that's a key factor, which is extremely fundamental with thinking through any source of data to help frame a patient journey. And then lastly, there definitely has to be a sense of the flexibility of the data. To what extent could it be that data architecture be modified to include other sources of data as we continue to develop new knowledge around how patients are progressing with disease? To what extent could those new data sets be readily integrated into this backbone of a patient journey to generate additional insights? So these are some of the main considerations that we all are thinking about as we're thinking about sourcing data to begin to stitch together the real world patient journeys of patients throughout the population. And I'm excited that at Komodo Health Care we've effectively done that with our healthcare map, where we've painstakingly gone through the exercise of really connecting novel data sets, together to the tune of capturing the lives of 330 million patients across the United States, and 225 million of which we actually do have the race and ethnicity data of those patients, which is extremely key for us in clinical development as it pertains to a lot of the focus around ensuring that trials are very representative of the patients inflicted by the disease, and really supporting some of the trial diversity plans that the agency has signaled to the industry as an area of focus. And we do this across multiple providers, multiple payers, healthcare organizations, seeing so many different therapies and procedures being executed on these patients. And I think the unique thing here, which is definitely gets me extremely excited about what Komodo has done, is that this data is sourced from multiple sources, and it truly is representative. And with a huge amount of these sources, we've actually been able to establish proprietary relationships with different payers to actually access their direct files. So there's no second, third, or third party manipulation with that. That's truly directly sourced. So there's extremely high fidelity with that data. And we've definitely constructed the architecture in a way where it's linkable to new data sets, and it's continuously refreshed over time to ensure that we are always having an accurate view as to the patient journey across the United States. So this is really exciting, but it's the reality is that it's not just about the data. Definitely, everything starts with that data, especially in today's landscape where a lot of that data is siloed. But we truly believe it's more about what you do with that data and how you translate that data to the space of actually generating insights, and then leverage those insights to take action to really drive impact. And for us, it's really enabling our partners to drive impact at that patient level. So with that, we can talk about some of what that impact is, and we'll kind of follow the sequence of thinking through designing a clinical trial through selecting sites and investigators for that trial, ultimately enrolling and accelerating recruitment for that trial, and then supporting patients after. So I'm sure with this audience, they're fully aware that there's so many components, considerations that feed into designing a clinical trial. You definitely are not trying to compromise patient safety. That's definitely at the top. There's a general sense of understanding the particular molecule's mechanism of action and how that works in the body, and therefore what therapeutic areas would be of interest. Generally, a lot of clinical scientists kind of understand what has come before them, look at previous trials and how they were structured, and the different endpoints that were factored into that trial. But with all these trials, there's definitely a component where you're effectively trying to design the control arm of that study, and really getting a sense of exactly what is happening in the country today, and exactly what patients are experiencing across different lines of therapy is extremely informative to feed into the design of that control arm, and also feed into the design of thinking through what clinical endpoints might be relevant for that control arm. This is exactly what we did with one customer, where they were really trying to understand the treatment patterns to inform a control arm for one of their studies within the follicular lymphoma space. And we were able to seamlessly interrogate our patient level data to surface up treatment patterns across different lines of therapy, and begin to see the relative proportion of different types of chemo and other types of therapy that patients were generally receiving within within this therapeutic area. And this was extremely insightful for them as they thought through the strategy and design of going into the first line versus second line versus fourth line, and effectively what a suitable control arm might be relative to the actual experience of patients, the actual experience of patients with inflicted by that disease. Furthermore, for them, they were definitely intrigued by potentially going into the first line. So we did another analysis of thinking through how quickly patients move between the first line and the second line treatment within this disease area. And it was extremely insightful for them to understand that typically when patients receive the first line treatment, they stay on that treatment to at least the tune of 5 years, or at least the 5 year assessment window that we perform for this customer. This was extremely informative for them to understand that if they wanted to pursue a first line treatment, first of all, they had an understanding of what that control arm most likely would look like relative to what patients are experiencing today. But then this also began to help them inform what that clinical endpoint might have to look like to really drive and create a trial that could be very compelling, knowing that a lot of patients stay on that particular first line treatment over the course of 5 years. So that was one area where being able to really interrogate the patient level data and the patient journeys for this particular therapeutic area really informed how this customer was thinking about designing their control arm. Another key element of any clinical trial is the inclusion and exclusion criteria as well. And setting that inclusion exclusion criteria really defines the target patient populations that are going to be screening eligible for that particular study. And as you can imagine, there's so many factors to consider in terms of setting the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And invariably it's extremely important to understand what the downstream ramifications in terms of the available patients and the patient characteristics might be of a given set of inclusion exclusion criteria. And this is one area where really being able to understand and interrogate the patient journeys at scale across a population can really begin to inform that and position clinical scientists to make a better decision in light of what the downstream ramifications of one particular set of inclusion exclusion criteria might be. And it's pretty compelling to be able to do this with a sense of understanding potentially disproportionate impact to different racial and ethnic groups based upon different inclusion exclusion criteria that are being considered. And in some cases that may not ultimately result in a clinical scientist choosing not to use a particular inclusion exclusion criteria, because that might be required relative to the mechanism of action and the specific therapeutic area they're going after. But even the knowledge of knowing that that particular inclusion exclusion criteria set may disproportionately impact a particular race or ethnic group can begin to inform the strategy of how to think about executing that trial and operationalizing that trial, and what specific levers they might want to consider to mitigate that once that trial gets into the recruitment phase. You can see comparing different sets of inclusion exclusion criteria across different other demographics across a patient. But then also more importantly, you can interrogate the patient journey to understand relative rates of different diagnoses that could be associated comorbidities of interest, and really being able to surface and say, if I was to scenario model one set of inclusion exclusion criteria versus another, and easily compare different diagnosis rates of specific comorbidities, that can begin to better characterize the target patient populations, and really begin to inform how we might mitigate any risks associated with designing that trial and or executing that trial. So again, another key way of how modeling, scenario modeling, the impact of different exclusion criteria based upon the patient level journeys can really begin to inform and challenge some of the assumptions we may have around the experience of patients in the real world. Now, moving on, let's assume you've done that and really challenged some of the assumptions, or confirm some of your assumptions. There's a key component also around how you think about selecting sites and investigators for your specific trial. And you can imagine seeing the patient journeys of several patients for a particular therapeutic area, stitching that together and understanding how they interact with the healthcare system, and then indexing on the specific providers that they're seeing and the specific healthcare organizations that they're going to for care, and understanding some of the characteristics of those providers can be extremely helpful in informing the site and investigator selection decisions for a particular trial. And again, this is something that can be done, and we can begin to see for a particular therapeutic area all the providers across different specialties that are treating patients, and the extent to which they have high volume of those specific patients for for a specific disease, which is visualized here by the clinical score. The extent to which these providers are also involved in clinical trials and or publications, scientific publications, which is indicated by the scientific score, and also the extent to which they are engaged with the biopharma industry as a whole in terms of receiving payments for paid engagements, as indicated by the industry score, and beginning to surface up this data relative to the real world data as it pertains to the patients that these providers are seeing. It's extremely helpful as an input into informing that site and investigator selection decision. One of the key areas understanding the referral patterns, so we can zoom out and in across the patient journey to understand how patients are flowing across different providers. And this can be a very insightful way to identify a particular provider who might be a central node in a network of other providers, and that could be extremely informative for deciding on whether to select that provider explicitly to participate in that trial, or to identify that provider as a key source of referrals for patients to participate in that trial. So again, all this is available by really leveraging the patient journeys at scale, and beginning to challenge some of the assumptions around the specific providers and institutions that might be best inclined to participate in a particular clinical trial. Another lens to this is also understanding some of the treatment patterns of different specialties. And this is another example we did with one customer who was working in the chronic kidney disease space, and really wanted to understand the treatment patterns across different specialties for patients inflicted by this disease across different albumin levels. And we're able to do this at scale across all specialties. And they were particularly interested in specialties that were disproportionately providing or prescribing GLPs for this condition. And when we did the analysis for specialty, was interesting and compelling to them to see that endocrinologists were the leading source of of of, of prescribing GLP treatment for this condition, and that was a key source of insight for them, because that characteristic, the GLP prescription, was a key attribute of the inclusion exclusion criteria. So again, being able to understand the setting of care, the specialties, their treatment patterns, all informed by the patient journey, can really begin to elevate how to support decisions around site and investigator selection for a particular clinical trial. Now we'll move on to the area of recruiting. So challenge assumptions around the status and the experience of patients in the healthcare system to really inform elements of the trial design. Ultimately, also leveraging that to inform how we select sites and investigators. You can still tap into this to really accelerate trial recruitment once the trial begins and is actively recruiting. And the way we think about this is there are probably key moments across that patient journey that would be precursors to a patient becoming screening eligible for a particular trial. And imperative to be able to identify those key moments and intervene as a source of potentially recruiting those patients for those trials. And it could be maybe the patient is newly diagnosed with a particular disease after receiving some other diagnosis or a particular history or health history. Maybe they're tested for a new disease or received a particular procedure, which would be a precursor to a diagnosis of a particular disease. Maybe they started a new therapy, a specific type of therapy that might be a key input into inclusion exclusion criteria. Or maybe they're on continuous therapy for a particular regimen of treatments where you've already assessed the patient journey to understand that patients would typically progress from that treatment regimen over to another, and that might be a key time to intervene and talk about a potential clinical trial. So we're able to do this in effectively near real time, and in real time interrogate the patient level data throughout the patient's journeys and really begin to surface up anytime you might be seeing a particular new diagnosis, a new treatment, starting a new therapy, or again being on a continuous regimen of therapy. And being able to do this really at scale and being able to see the locations and the particular providers that are treating these patients can be a very strategic lever to accelerate recruitment, and reach out to those potential providers for referrals into that trial. So pretty compelling way to again leverage that the patient journey to inform to accelerate trial recruitment. Now, the last piece I wanted to talk about was how we support patients post their approval, and fully appreciate that this may not be a key component of clinical development, but effectively we're all doing this to address unmet needs and to support patients. And the reality is that, as I'm sure most of you can appreciate, the inclusion exclusion criteria that sets the stage for a particular clinical trial, is it tends to be very refined. And once that drug is approved, the discipline around, or the requirement around meeting all of that inclusion exclusion criteria doesn't necessarily always translate into the label. So once the drug is out there in the real world and patients are 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 using it, there's still opportunity where there might be limited access to that drug. And again, being able to go back and interrogate the patient journeys and understand what is it about the particular patient's interaction with the healthcare system that might make them get ready access to a drug versus or not. It can be extremely insightful to continue to support patients. And not to mention over time beginning to understand different elements of different barriers that a patient might encounter as far as it pertains to accessing that drug, and maybe different sources or additional sources of evidence that could be generated when that drug is actually out there in the real world. And in some instances, for particular therapies, there might even be patient support programs that might exist for in a particular company where the folks running these programs are interacting on a one-to-one basis with different patients and really understanding some of their barriers to access. And that qualitative data can really be informed and bolstered by understanding the quantitative data that's feeding into broad strokes patient journeys at scale, and really being able to link that together to support how to think through reducing some of the barriers to access, understanding what some of the challenges that these patients are experiencing once that drug is out there in the real world, and beginning able to inform potentially new studies or new trials that might be designed to really generate the necessary evidence to continue to drive benefit to patients. So definitely wanted to highlight that as one way that we could continue to support and leverage the patient journey analysis to really support patients even after the trial is done. So hopefully this has been helpful to get a sense of how like really understanding the patient level journey and really informing that by real world data and getting a sense of exactly what the experience is for different patients is somewhat of the bedrock of the knowledge space and insight space that can really begin to inform trial strategy from design all the way through execution and even getting a sense of how to continue to support patients post approval. And hopefully you've all found this extremely insightful. And with that, I will pause and open up for questions at this point. And thank you for joining.
Thank you for such an informative presentation. Before we get started on the question and answer session, I would like to remind our audience how to submit questions. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found directly below the video player. And our first question is, how else have you seen users use your platform to support trial design and execution?
Yeah, so definitely with some of the two use cases here, modeling, scenario modeling different inclusion exclusion criteria, understanding treatment patterns to inform design of control arms. But then there's also users who've leveraged the platform to really consider external control arms or consider different source real world evidence that may already exist to inform the design of an external control arm. So that's another area where some customers have leveraged the platform, specifically within the clinical trial design space. The other one is also thinking through mid to long term follow up from a safety and efficacy perspective. And some customers really exploring linking in the actual clinical trial data to real world data for the patients that were specifically enrolled in that trial and potentially maybe even lost to follow up. But effectively seeing how those specific patients interact with the healthcare system post that trial into the mid and long term without necessarily having to stand up a new trial. That's been another source of data and evidence that has been very informative into thinking through the design of other trials. So those are two other areas where customers have leveraged the platform.
And for the next question, how many of the 225 million patients where you have ethnicity profiles do you also have deep clinical, not just claims data?
Deep clinical, not just claims data. So the the foundation of our healthcare map is claims data, but it's also infused and enriched with EHR data. So effectively, the source of the race and ethnicity data is actually coming from an EHR source, and some of that source also includes lab values and vital signs as well. So we're able to surface that up as well. But we're also able, or we've also designed the foundational healthcare map to be linkable to other data sets. So we've had multiple customers actually bring in additional data sets or have reached out to us to see if we could work with other parties to bring in specific data sets as well. That could be labs, omics data, for instance, to really elevate some of the insights that could be generated from the healthcare map.
Cool. And
Mhm.
you have a wealth of data, but how intuitive is it to get these insights, especially for users who are not technical data scientists?
Yeah, and I actually think this is where we stand out and we shine. So again, you definitely have to start with the data, but it's what you do with the data. How do you get insights? And so we have software solutions that effectively interrogate the data, and one of them is a low code no code solution where you're easily able to surface up patients that are screening eligible for a particular trial based upon your inclusion exclusion criteria. That's brought to you somewhat effectively immediately after you input that. It's smart, so you don't necessarily have to be a genius in all the ICD-10 codes. You can start typing like lung cancer, and then it'll start to pre-populate. But then we also have customer support and a clinical innovations team that's housed by doctors, pharmacists, and a lot of extremely smart people to also support you in doing that. So that's one product. There's another product, which most of what I shared today are actually screenshots explicitly from our products. Another product that we're able to see the healthcare provider and healthcare organization experience, so that clinical volume experience, the scientific experience, the industry experience, being able to visualize their referral patterns. That's a software solution as well. And then there's another software solution that can send you the weekly alerts to accelerate patient recruitment as well. So pretty seamless to get to these insights that I shared. And for the folks who are data scientists, we also have a product that essentially is your playground, where you're able to access directly the patient level data at scale, create your own queries, Python, R, SAS, run your own algorithms and your own models as well. So we support users across the spectrum.
And how are you able to maintain patient privacy throughout your solutions?
Yeah, so the way we do that is through tokenization of the patient level data. So all the patient level data within our healthcare map is de-identified, and we have a strategic partnership with Datavant. They're our tokenization partner. They handle that. We don't touch any personal identifiable information at all. So the patient level data is all de-identified within our system. As you can imagine, the healthcare provider side of that healthcare organization is not. So we're able to see specifics on the treating physicians and the setting of care that patients are experiencing. But patient level data is de-identified, and we leverage tokenization engine to do that.
Awesome. And unfortunately with that is our last question. So we're want to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Komodo, for making today's educational webcast possible. We would like to ask everyone in the audience to participate in a brief survey. This survey will appear on your screen after today's presentation has ended. You will receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Thanks to everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.